Hey guys, your Philly neighborhood vampire witch magic here, and today we're talking about how sex education often leaves out important truths, reinforces stereotypes, and fails everyone, especially when it comes to gender bias. Sex education is gendered from the start. When it comes to girls, sex education often focuses on fear of getting pregnant, fear of ruining your reputation, fear of being labeled. We are taught from a young age that our bodies are dangerous, not just to ourselves, but to others as well. That if we slip up, we will suffer from the consequences. That if we don't monitor ourselves, bad things will happen to us. And the responsibility is placed on our shoulders for that. We are told to protect our virginity like it is a prize or a possession someone else might try to steal. Virginity is framed as this magical boundary between good and bad, worthy and unworthy, respectable and ruined. It is never framed as a personal choice about our bodies. It is about how others might judge us. Boys are rarely told, if ever, to protect their virginity. They are usually told to chase experiences and that sex is a status symbol. Meanwhile, girls are warned that any mistake could define them forever. On top of that, there's this constant pressure to be modest, not just in how we dress, but in how we speak, how we move, and how we interact. We are taught that drawing attention to our bodies is asking for trouble, but hiding them is virtuous. The shame-based messaging starts young and sticks with us into adulthood. Here is what is missing entirely: any real understanding of our anatomy, our bodies, or our pleasure. How many of us grew up thinking that our anatomy was weird, gross, or shameful because no one told us otherwise? How many of us weren't even taught what the clitoris is? Girls aren't even given the tools to understand their own bodies, let alone enjoy them. Instead, we are told our role is to protect our bodies from others, not to enjoy them or even understand them for ourselves. However, when it comes to boys, the conversation around sex usually centers on one thing: their bodies. They're taught about erections, how to avoid STDs, and sometimes even how to last longer. There's this underlying message that sex is the biological urge that they can't really control, something that is bound to happen, something to prepare for physically, and sex is presented almost like a milestone or a trophy to unlock manhood. Not having sex can make boys feel like they are falling behind. Having sex becomes a status symbol. It is rarely framed as something tied to emotional readiness, maturity, or mutual respect. And you know what is almost never included in these conversations? Respect, consent, communication, or emotional connection. The emotional side of sex gets completely overlooked. Boys aren't taught how to ask, how to listen, or how to navigate boundaries, either theirs or someone else's. They are rarely encouraged to think about whether they even want sex for the right reasons. It is assumed that they do. It is treated like an expectation rather than a choice. And this sets boys up for a really shallow understanding of intimacy. They are taught to pursue sex, but not taught how to have healthy conversations around it. Not taught how to deal with rejection, vulnerability, or how to handle their own emotions, or anyone else's. And this isn't just harmful for girls, it hurts the boys too. It leaves them feeling like their worth is tied to their sexual conquest, not their character or their connections. It tells them that being vulnerable makes them weak, and that is a lie. That lie follows many men well into adulthood. It is no wonder so many people grow up confused. One group is taught fear, shame, and silence. The other taught pride, pursuit, and entitlement. What gives status to one causes the other to lose worth. Neither is taught how to communicate, how to respect boundaries, or how to build trust. Girls are taught that they are responsible for everyone's behavior. One of the most harmful messages girls receive is that it is their responsibility to prevent pregnancy, to prevent boys from getting them pregnant. We are told to say no, to dress modestly, to set the boundaries, and to be the gatekeepers of sex, as if boys simply can't control themselves. This idea that boys can't help themselves is not just outdated, it's dangerous. It excuses bad behavior, it dismisses accountability, and it feeds directly into a culture where girls are blamed for what happens to them. And boys are often let off the hook because, well, they couldn't help it and have their whole lives ahead of them. When girls are taught to prevent, to avoid, and to say no, but boys aren't taught equally about consent, boundaries, and respect, what happens when something goes wrong? The blame lands on the girl. She must not have said no loud enough. She wasn't wearing the right thing. She shouldn't have been there anyway. It becomes her fault for not stopping something she never consented to in the first place. These lessons tell girls from the start that if something bad happens, it is because you failed, not because someone else made a harmful choice. So much of sex education for girls is wrapped up in fear. Fear of pregnancy, fear of being called names, fear of losing something valuable, like like virginity is this fragile thing that we have to protect at all costs. Purity culture tells girls their worth is tied to whether they have had sex or not. That once you cross that invisible line, you are less valuable, less respectable, less worthy. It is a tactic of control disguised as protection, and it teaches shame. Shame around bodies, around desire, and even around natural development. And on top of it, girls live under the constant threat of being labeled. If you're too modest, you're a prude. You're too confident, you're asking for it. Too sexually active, well, now you're a slut. The line is always moving, and no one ever tells you where it really is. Slut shaming isn't just about name calling. It is a system of policing girls' bodies and choices. It teaches us to judge ourselves and each other, and it keeps us from having open, honest conversations about sex, boundaries, or even pleasure. I remember growing up being terrified of having people think the wrong things about me, terrified of being seen as easy, but also scared of being seen as cold. It was exhausting and unfair. None of this taught me how to feel safe in my own body. It only taught me how to feel ashamed of it, how to blame myself for others taking advantage of me and even forcing themselves on me. From a young age, boys are encouraged to see sex as something to pursue, something to win, or something to conquer. It is treated like a rite of passage or a trophy that proves their masculinity or status. And the message is clear. Having sex makes you a man. This turns sex into a competition, not a connection. It teaches boys to chase the goal of sex instead of the experience of intimacy, respect, or care. What is left out of their conversations? Vulnerability, consent, emotional connection. Boys aren't taught how to ask for consent, how to handle rejection, or how to understand their own feelings, let alone how to respect the feelings of others. Instead, they are taught to hide their emotions, to push through discomfort, and to ignore any feelings that doesn't align with this strong and dominant image of masculinity. And the result? Boys are left without the tools they need to build healthy relationships. And let's not forget, boys struggle with body image too, but because society rarely acknowledges it or accepts it, they are left to battle those insecurities alone. They are expected to meet unrealistic standards, whether it is about size, performance, or appearance. But no one talks about how that pressure affects their mental health. Boys are taught to be responsible for achievements, but not for emotions. They are rarely given space to process their insecurities, their doubts, or even their fears about sex or anything else. Relationships, or even themselves. This leaves many of them emotionally stunted, confused, and unsure of how to connect in healthy ways. And these harmful messages don't just hurt boys, they hurt everyone. When boys aren't taught about respect, communication, and vulnerability, it feeds into a culture where unhealthy relationships are normalized, where consent is misunderstood, and where emotional connection is undervalued. And boys deserve better. They deserve to know their worth isn't tied to sexual conquests. They deserve education that teaches them how to build trust, communicate openly, and navigate relationships with empathy, not entitlement. So what is missing? One of the biggest gaps in sex education is the way we talk about consent, or rather how little we do. If it is mentioned at all, it is usually framed as a one-time yes or no, but real consent is ongoing. It is enthusiastic, it is mutual, and it can be revoked at any time. Consent isn't just about avoiding harm. It's about building trust, communication, and respect. It is about making sure everyone involved feels safe, valued, and heard at every step of the way. Another thing we rarely are taught is how to actually talk about sex and how to communicate our boundaries, our needs, and our desires. It is not just about what we don't want, it is also about knowing and expressing what we do want in a safe, respectful, and honest way. Healthy communication isn't awkward or shameful, it is essential. Without it, people are left guessing or assuming, which leads to confusion, discomfort, and harm. Most sex education programs aren't just outdated, they're exclusive. They erase anyone who does not fall into the heterosexual norm. They ignore people with disabilities and they treat cisgender heterosexual sex as the only version of sex that matters. Inclusive education means recognizing that sex, relationships, and bodies look different for everyone. It is about making sure all kids, no matter who they are, feel seen, respected, and informed, not ashamed or invisible. And another thing we desperately need is honest conversations about body diversity. Bodies come in all shapes, sizes, and appearances. Cycles vary, genitals vary, development varies, but if you only learn from textbooks, porn, or outdated diagrams, it is easy to think there is just one right way to look or function. Normalizing this diversity helps fight shame and insecurity, and it teaches people that their bodies are valid just as they are, no shame required. Most of us grew up learning about anatomy through a fear-based lens, how to avoid pregnancy, how to prevent STDs, but rarely how our bodies actually work when it comes to pleasure, intimacy, and connection. Everyone deserves to understand their own bodies, not just how they can be harmed, but how they can feel good, how they can function, and how to communicate about it. Education about pleasure isn't dangerous, it is empowering. It teaches people to make informed, consensual choices and to respect their own experiences and the experiences of others. Imagine how much safer, healthier, and more confident people would feel if we taught them from the start that their bodies aren't shameful, communication is not embarrassing, and consent is non-negotiable. That is the kind of education everyone deserves. So what are the consequences? For starters, it reinforces harmful double standards. Girls are expected to say no and protect their purity. Boys are expected to chase sex to prove their masculinity. For one to succeed, the other must fail. The same behavior, being sexually active, gets girls labeled as shameful and boys praised as accomplished. These double standards create confusion, shame, and judgment, especially for young people trying to figure out their place in the world. When boys are taught that they can't control themselves and girls are taught that it is their job to set boundaries, it feeds directly into RAPE culture. It suggests that crossing boundaries is expected and that it is up to victims to prevent harm rather than holding people accountable for their own actions. This is how we end up with harmful ideas like, well, she was asking for it, or boys will be boys. It excuses harmful behavior and shifts blame onto survivors. Consent should be at the heart of any conversation about sex, but instead it is often completely overlooked. Boys aren't taught how to recognize or respect boundaries, and girls aren't taught how to confidently express theirs. Without education about mutual respect and clear communication, accountability gets ignored. We can't expect people to make healthy, respectful choices if we never teach them how. These messages also create deep body shame and insecurity. When girls are told their bodies are dangerous or shameful, they internalize that. When boys are taught their worth is tied to performance or conquest, they feel pressure to live up to impossible expectations. Nobody wins in a system where shame is the foundation. It leads to people feeling disconnected from their own bodies, uncomfortable with intimacy, and afraid to communicate their needs. Without inclusive, accurate education, people are left to learn from unreliable sources, whether that is porn, rumors, or outdated myths. Misinformation about anatomy, pleasure, and boundaries spreads easily when no one is providing the truth. This leads to confusion, mistakes, and harm, not because people want to cause harm, but because they are never taught how not to. All this sets people up for unhealthy, unbalanced relationships. If you don't know how to communicate, if you're carrying shame about your body, if you think sex is about power rather than connection, how can you build something healthy, safe, and respectful? People enter adulthood lacking the tools they need for emotional intimacy, trust, and mutual respect. And that hurts everyone involved. We deserve better. Our kids deserve better. We need education that teaches people how to respect themselves and each other, how to communicate, and how to value consent, how to embrace their bodies without shame. That is how we break this cycle. How can we do better? We can start by teaching body neutrality and positivity to everyone. Teach kids mutual respect, consent, and communication from an early age. Provide them with inclusive, shame-free resources such as scarleteen.com, the Labia Library, and bedsider.org. Start to shift the focus from fear to empowerment while teaching kids to make informed choices. Sex education should empower, not shame. It should include all bodies, all experiences, and all genders. Share in the comments. What do you wish you had been taught? What message has stuck with you the longest, and why? If this opened your eyes or resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more honest conversations.